we're gonna make us some meatballs. So we're gonna make a couple things today. One of them is gonna be baked ziti, and a nice side dish to baked ziti is meatballs. And I know we've talked about meatballs before when we were making marinara sauce and we served that with some brajol, but today we're gonna make meatballs. And like I've said before, in every episode, every family has their own version of a meatball. Some families put pinoli nuts in their meatballs, some families put raisins in their meatballs, some people use day-old Italian bread and soak it in milk, some people use breadcrumbs. So let me tell you how I make my meatballs, and it's not an exact science. Sometimes I add a little of this, sometimes I add a little of that, sometimes a little more of this and a little less of that, but I'm gonna tell you how I'm making my meatballs today. So in my bowl, I've already taken some Italian-style breadcrumbs and soaked it in a little bit of milk. Now that's just to soften them. In the old days, you would use old Italian bread, stale Italian bread. You would break it up or even crush it, and then you would add a little milk to soften it. But I decided to use breadcrumbs. And if you are gluten-free, you can certainly use gluten-free breadcrumbs and you really won't even notice the difference. And then what I'm gonna add to this is I'm going to add a mix of meat. I have about 4 pounds of meat. 3 of those pounds are a meatloaf mix. And the meatloaf mix is nice because it's 3 different kinds of meat. It's a pork, it's a veal, and it's a ground beef. And then I added, just for a little extra flavor, some 80% ground beef. Now 80% means that it does have a higher content of fat, but fat is not bad. Fat actually makes, it brings out flavor and it gives some good flavoring to our meatballs. So I've got that in the bowl, and I'm also going to add some freshly grated Parmesan cheese. Of course, because Parmesan cheese goes in everything Italian. We're gonna add some fresh parsley. I've already chopped up some fresh parsley, and I'm just gonna add a little bit into it, gives it some nice flavor. Now, when you're purchasing parsley, you wanna make sure you're getting Italian parsley. The leaves look somewhat like that, which is very close to cilantro, but it is not. So you wanna make sure you're getting parsley. Cilantro has a very distinct smell. Parsley comes in 2 different versions, a curly leaf and a flat leaf. Flat leaf is what I use. I was trying to make it look pretty, but it's just not. And then I have here 5 eggs. I've beaten them ever so slightly. And what the egg's job here in the meatballs is to bind everything together. So eggs have lots of different uses when you're baking or cooking, but the purpose it has here is to bind, meaning to hold everything together. So I've got meatballs in there, now, eggs in there, and it depends how many eggs you add. Some recipes call for 2. I like to add extra eggs in mine. It all depends. And then I've got some salt and a little pepper, fresh ground pepper. Now, I'm gonna add a little bit more salt. And again, you notice I'm not actually measuring things out, which if you were watching any of my baking miles to go videos, you'll notice that in baking, it's all about measurement. It's an exact science. But when you're cooking, when I'm making something like meatballs, depending on how it looks or how I like it, I might add a little bit more or a little bit less of something. Like garlic, for example, I'm gonna add a few teaspoons of garlic. Now, if you're worried about vampires, you might want to add more, but I'm not. So I'm only going to add 2 teaspoons of garlic. Now, you might have noticed that I have this cute little spoon and this cute little tiny coffee pot over here. Well, let me tell you what this is. So we've talked about how Italians like really dark, strong coffee. Well, this is a demi-tasse coffee pot, right? Isn't that adorable? If I was a coffee pot, I would want to be this cute and adorable. And a demi-tasse spoon. So spoons come in all different sizes and shapes, but this is a demi-tasse, meant for the little petite coffee that would come out of here, a demi-tasse coffee. Sometimes served with a cordial like a sambuca. It's very strong, very rich coffee. And the little spoon, little side notes. Okay, I'm gonna mix up the meatballs and see if I need to add anything else to this. Now, I like to use my hands. Some people don't like the feel of the meat, so they use gloves. I, of course, made sure my hands are clean. And then when I'm done doing this, I'm gonna make sure that I sanitize my kitchen really well. Because ground meat does have the potential to carry bacteria, so you wanna make sure that you're sanitizing really well. And you don't ever wanna eat raw ground meat. You can eat raw beef, meaning like steak tartare, and that's safe to eat, done properly of course, but never ground meat, which is why you always wanna order your hamburgers medium or medium well. You don't ever want it to have a cold inside. And you can see what I'm doing is I'm just kind of folding the meat over onto each other just to make sure that it's all mixed together, because I have some different kinds of meat in here. Remember, I have a meatloaf mix, and I also just have some plain 80-20 ground meat. So it's looking good. And a lot of cooking is knowing what something should feel like. And how these meatballs should feel is they should feel like they would be able to form into a ball and hold together. So let me just give one a roll. So just take a little bit, just mix it up in your hand. And yeah, it looks like we've got a good meatball. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna clean up. Like I said, I wanna sanitize. I'm gonna clean up, and then I'm gonna show you how I ensure all of my meatballs are the same size. And we're gonna fry these meatballs up, and then we're gonna make some baked ziti for a great Sunday sauce. I like to line up my meatballs on the parchment paper, nice and neat and organized. And what I have prepared and what I've gotten ready is one sheet pan with parchment paper on the bottom of it. And then I put my raw meatballs here. And then you can see behind me, I've got another sheet pan out with a cooling rack over it. And the reason for that is I'm going to fry my meatballs, and then I'm gonna drain the fat out the bottom, and they're going to cool. And then I can do a couple things with them. I can put them in sauce if I want, or I can simply freeze them because they freeze really well with no sauce on them. And then I have them in my freezer if I want to make meatballs Parmesan, if I want to make a meatball sub, or just have some meatballs and spaghetti one night. But tonight we're having baked ziti because that's part 2 of this miles to go. We're gonna make some baked ziti. So give me about 5 minutes to get all these meatballs all set and ready to go, and then we'll talk about how to fry your meatballs so that they have a beautiful outer crust on them and that they're ready to be part of our Sunday meal. As you can see, I've started to fry my meatballs. Now, I have all the raw meatballs on one side on my half sheet pan here on the stovetop. Now, I can put it on the stovetop because I have an electric oven and it doesn't really get too hot. But right here on the edge, I do need to be cautious, just a little bit. Now, what I've done is in this frying pan, I've put a mix of olive oil. This happens to be from Trader Joe's. It's Trader Giotto's olive oil. Get it? So it's mostly olive oil, and then I would say I probably add just about a cup of vegetable oil in as well. Now the reason I fry in olive oil, it's because it's Italian, and vegetable oil is because it can take the heat of the meatballs. You wouldn't want to fry in something like butter, because butter would burn before it got to the temperature that we needed to cook the meatballs. And you wouldn't want to fry in something like a peanut oil or a sunflower oil because that flavor would be way too strong and doesn't go with our delicate meatballs. Now, just as a little side note, how I arrange my meatballs in the pan is important. I start at 12 o'clock, meaning I drop my first meatball in here at 12 o'clock, and I work my way around clockwise, so I know when my meatballs need to be rotated. A lot of people bake their meatballs. You can bake them right in the oven at about 400 degrees, and that works just as well if you don't like to fry. I personally like to fry my meatballs. Meatballs, chicken cutlet, eggplant, and fried chicken is all I really fry. And I do fry in heart-healthy oils, so that makes a difference. And now I take my meatball, the one that's at 12 o'clock, this little guy here, the first to go in the fryer, and I just kind of roll them over gently. And you can see, if I could just get a little shot of this, come here little guy. You can see he started to brown on one side. So he's ready to be rolled over. And then I'm just gonna work my way around and roll them ever so softly. Now you could also use a slotted spoon to do this, but I prefer the tongs because sometimes they get a little stuck at the bottom, and the tongs just offer just enough sharpness to kind of undo them, if you will. Now, anytime you're frying, you do need to be really careful. You don't ever want to leave the oil unattended. The oil is hot. On my electric stove, I set it to about 6. So a little bit upwards of medium heat. It doesn't need to be on high. I just feel like the oil gets too high too fast. But again, if you've never fried before, maybe do it with some adult supervision. And again, don't ever leave the oil and don't underestimate how hot it gets. All right. Now, well, this little guy's being temperamental. Depending on what you're doing with these meatballs depends on how long you're gonna cook them for. Now, if you were to fry these meatballs and then put them in a pot of sauce, you wouldn't need to cook them all the way through because they would cook the rest of the way in the pot of sauce. But I'm gonna fry them, and then what I'm gonna do is let them cool on my cooling rack. So I'm gonna let them be just about all the way cooked through. And I can figure out when they're cooked a couple of different ways. I can use a meat thermometer and stick it in the middle of my meatball and see what the internal temperature reads, or I can just give them a little feel. I have enough experience making meatballs that I know, see how that guy's still squishy? He's not quite done yet, but I would give him about 2 or 3 more minutes and he's gonna be ready to come onto my cooling rack, which I've set up over here on the side so that the oil can just simply drain through. So as you can see, our meatballs are just about finished. I have some on the pan that are all ready to eat. And if I wanted to my cameraman is naughty, naughty, naughty. So if I wanted to freeze some of these meatballs, I would freeze them just like this, put a little wax paper down in a Tupperware container or a glass baking sheet, and I would freeze those as is and then take out whenever I needed. These are going to be served for dinner tonight with our baked ziti, which as you can see by the big pot of water we're getting ready to prepare. I've salted some water for our baked ziti to boil the noodles. And these meatballs here are still finishing up. You can see I've lifted them. They're gently rolling around in the olive oil with just a touch of vegetable oil. And we want them to be nice and brown. But as it is, these guys are all ready right here. So let's get set to make our baked ziti, and then we'll serve our dinner tonight with some nice freshly fried meatballs. Honey! Okay, so we're ready to do our baked ziti now. Now, what I have prepared already is 32 ounces of ricotta cheese, whole milk ricotta. I typically don't use part skim or low fat. I think the added extra fat gives it a really nice taste. So what I have in here is 32 ounces of ricotta cheese, 1 pound of mozzarella cheese, whole milk again. I'm gonna also add in, I would say, a half a cup of Parmesan cheese. Again, freshly grated Parmesan, some pepper, and a little bit of salt. Not too much salt, but just a little. And then I also have 6 eggs that have been lightly beaten, and I'm gonna add that in as well. And I'm gonna give this a little bit of a stir. Now, people, again, make their baked ziti differently. Some people put sausage in their baked ziti. Some people put crushed up meatballs. Some people make it vegetarian, meaning it has no meat. It's really up to you to do it as you like. All right, so we have this mixed up, and I'm gonna add just about 1/8 to 1/4 of a cup fresh parsley. Again, fresh parsley right there. Beautiful. Parsley and basil are used in quite a bit of different ingredients in Italian cooking. So we've got our cheese mixture ready to go. All right, that looks looks good. And you want it moist, but you don't want it too moist. Okay, so that's all set and ready to go. So I'm gonna bring this down here along with my 2 casserole pans. Now, I prefer to use something like a ceramic, like this is a ceramic casserole dish, if you will. Some people use throwaway aluminum pans, but I prefer to use these. And I have 2 different sizes out. One, which I'm gonna have for dinner tonight, and another one that I'm gonna put in the freezer for a night where I'm too busy to cook. And what I've done is I've prepared the bottom of these dishes with just a little bit of, you guessed it, olive oil. And I used my pastry brush. I just brush it around the sides just a little bit, just because you don't want anything to stick. So I just put that around the sides like that. And in order to prepare the bottom of the pan, I'm using my 3-ounce scoop, and I'm gonna scoop in the large one 2 scoops of our tomato sauce. Now remember, this was from another episode of Miles to Go when we made marinara sauce. We talked about all the uses for a marinara sauce. Well, here's one of them. And over here, I'm gonna do just 3 ounces. And that's what we're gonna do in order to get our pans all set and ready. And what we're gonna do in the meantime is wait for our pasta to boil. So if we wanna move back over here, I have a pot of large pot of salted water ready to go to put our 2 pounds of ziti noodles in. Now, ziti noodles are noodles that don't have the lines in them. And this is what we're gonna use for our baked ziti. And you can see our meatballs are just about finished. And you're gonna join us in another minute when our pasta's done and we've got everything ready to assemble. So we've got our 2 pounds of pasta all set, all cooked to alla dente, which means firm to the touch. We don't want our pasta to be, in Italian you say mouchade, because then it falls apart and it's soggy. So you want it alla dente. So we have our alla dente pasta with a little extra mozzarella cheese for on top when we're all set and ready. And I've included a few meatballs. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pour about half, maybe a little less, into this pan. And you can see I have a plate under it because it just came out of the pot and it's still a little steamy. So you want to work somewhat fast so that it doesn't stick. You could even put a little bit of olive oil on it too. So I want to make sure it's has plenty of tomato sauce. All right, so I've got that. Now I'm going to put my cheese mixture. Remember, this has mozzarella cheese, ricotta cheese, parsley, and a little Parmesan. And I'm just gonna spoon some in, like so, spread it around, like so, put it over there, like so, a little more over there. I'm gonna mix this all up. Okay. Happen to have an extra spoon right here. Handy dandy, who would have thought? Now, what I decided to do, just for a little fun for this one, is to put some of my meatballs that I just got finished frying into this one as well. So you just simply crush up the meatballs, spoon them in on top. Now, some people like cooked sausage, some people like meatballs, some people like to take their meatballs and slice them and put them as like another layer. I just kind of like to break them up and put them on as is. Just adds another layer of excitement into the baked ziti, if you will. All right, so there we go. We've got some meatballs, and now, you guessed it, we need some more sauce. And the corners are important to make sure that they have enough sauce in them, because without, they'll get dry and crusty. We don't want that. All right, there we go. Right down the middle. I'm gonna put just a little bit more pasta, not too much. I'm gonna use my hands this time because I'm afraid as it gets sticky that if I tried to empty it, it'll all come crashing in. Now, I'm not gonna lie, the pasta's a little hot, so just beware. All right. So, there you have it. Okay. And again, guess what we're doing? You guessed it, a little bit more sauce. That, a little bit more cheese, just to make sure we have enough. We don't want anybody to say it was dry. That is like a curse in Italian. If your ziti's not good, that's not good at all. Okay, so looks like we've got plenty of cheese. I'm gonna give this one good mix up. I'm gonna use a small spoon. I know some of you might go like, oh gosh, couldn't you use a bigger spoon? But I don't want it flying all over the place. See, I'm kind of pushing some of it down so it's in. All right, and then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put an extra layer of mozzarella cheese on top just to make sure it's cheesy and delicious. All right, there we go. A little extra mozzarella cheese. Now, some people might even put a little Parmesan, a little extra Parmesan. I like to put the Parmesan after to taste. And there we go, folks. We've got a beautiful baked ziti, and we're gonna bake this between 45 minutes to an hour until the cheese, until it's all bubbly and hot and ready to go. Depending on the pan, depending on how deep, how much cheese, will depend how long it will take to bake. But this is a pretty good, heavy pot of baked ziti. So I hope you enjoy. This one I'm gonna make, it's gonna be a vegetarian one with no meatballs, but I have a meatball baked ziti, and it'll soon be a vegetarian baked ziti. So I hope you enjoyed, and buon appetito!